my co-chair, Hank Norton from Clinton, and I'd like to have, starting with Bowdoin's finest, representative, the panel introduce themselves.
My name is Representative Jim Dwyer. I represent Reading and Woburn.
Representative David Vieira from Communites.
Good morning, Paul Tucker. I represent the historic Salem, Massachusetts.
All right.
I'll clap for you up here. I want to welcome everyone. Obviously, a lot of very important pieces of legislation on to be heard from today. And see a lot of old friends and long-term friends here in the audience. And we will do our best to listen to everyone as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And I know that you too will be respectful and cooperative of each and every person's opinion that comes forward to testify today. Always a pleasure to see each and every one of you, and I will turn it over to today's national ceremonies, Senator Tim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The accommodations are rather spartan, and one is a little long, so I would ask everybody to keep their comments as brief as possible. Please limit yourself to the 3 minutes. 3 minutes is not for us, it is for your neighbor. We would like to get to everybody expeditiously. So, starting right off, Senator Eldridge.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Tilke, Chairman Naughton, members of the committee. I'm here to testify on a few bills. The first I wanted to talk about is the Massachusetts Trust Act, Senate 1258, House 1228. Bill that I filed with Representative Avandro Carvalho, and I appreciate this committee's close attention to the bill and reporting the bill on the committee last session. The problem we have, Mr. Chairman, with our immigration laws, including here in Massachusetts, is the uneven enforcement of our immigration laws. And I think also the point that we need to separate federal laws, including immigration law, from local and state laws, including law enforcement's involvement with the enforcement of local and state laws. And so what the Trust Act is proposing to do is restore the break of trust that is often the case between immigrant communities and law enforcement. And what does that mean? That means that right now, because of the excessive enforcement of our immigration laws, in some cases involving deportations, many members of the immigrant community, whether those who are legal residents or those who are undocumented, are afraid to call the police when they see a crime happening in the neighborhood, whether it's happening to themselves or a neighbor or someone in the community. So what this bill is proposing to do is make it clear that when someone is arrested, of course, there's a process where that person is fingerprinted, and those fingerprints go to the Department of Homeland Security as well as the FBI. If that person does not have a criminal record, but ICE, under the Department of Homeland Security, puts a hold on that person because of their legal status, then local law enforcement cannot hold that person if that person does not have a criminal record. And I think it's a very sort of nuanced issue, but again, the point is that anyone who's arrested, whether those who are U.S. citizens, whether they're legal permanent residents, whether they're undocumented, their criminal history is checked, they're fingerprinted, they're processed, but it's very clear that if that person is undocumented and does not have a criminal record, local law enforcement or state law enforcement should not be holding that person if ICE has a detainer. And the point there is that if that is allowed, Mr. Chairman, what that will create is a further fostering of that distrust between immigrant communities and the law enforcement that again will lead to crimes that are happening in the community not being reported, that lack of trust that leads to a reduction in public safety for all of us. And just very quickly, but I do want to make clear that I think sometimes there's an assumption that our law enforcement authorities are always have access to an accurate database or enforcing the law equally. And I would respectfully say, with respect to ICE and our federal immigration authorities, they're not doing that. The purpose of the Secure Communities policy, going back from the Obama administration first established it, was to target those immigrants who had a violent criminal background or history of committing crimes and deporting them, which I think we probably all support. The problem is that since 2008, just in Massachusetts, 46%, 835 immigrants who were undocumented were deported who had no criminal history. And that's the point, it's an uneven enforcement of the law. It's deporting people that, yes, are here who are undocumented, but they have not committed a crime. That's contrary to the priority, if you will, of our federal immigration authorities, which is supposed to be on those who have committed serious crimes in the United States. So I think there's a problem there, it's a lack of trust, and I appreciate the committee's strong consideration of this bill.
Enjoyed working on the bill, Senator, with you last session, and continue to do so. Any questions from the panel? Excellent job.
And if I could just be on the record for a couple more bills, is I've also filed a bill, Senate 1256, an act relative to training in law enforcement, and also Senate 1257, an act promoting the use of body-worn cameras by law enforcement. It's clearly something that is in the headlines and more attention. It will require all police officers to wear body cameras, and I really appreciate the committee's strong consideration of that as that becomes more and more discussed. And then I just want to be on the record for Senate 1313, workplace safety for nurses, and House 3480, filed by Representative Gentile regarding independent review of police misconduct. So again, thank you very much for taking me out of turn.
Well done, Senator. Thank you very much. Any questions? Representative Tilly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you taking me out of order.
I told you we did.
Mr. Chairman, Timothy, Chairman John, members of the committee, the Independent Police Conduct Review Board, I'm speaking today at House Number 3480. The Independent Police Conduct Review Board established by this bill would investigate and adjudicate all instances in which a member of law enforcement agency shoots another person. It would also have discretion to investigate and adjudicate allegations of misconduct by a member of a state or municipal law enforcement agency in the Commonwealth. All rulings that a member of a law enforcement agency engaged in misconduct would be subject to judicial review as provided in Section 14 of Chapter 30A. Now, we're fortunate in the Commonwealth to have police departments that are well managed and responsive to the communities that they serve. However, management problems, improper supervision, and/or professional misconduct by supervisory staff or other law enforcement members occur in one municipal police force or another from time to time. The ability to report allegations of misconduct to the Independent Police Conduct Review Board and successfully resolve them in a timely manner would allow departments experiencing dysfunctional management or less than best practice protocols to improve their operations much sooner than might otherwise be the case. The 7 members of the board drawn from the Mass Coalition of Police Officers, the American Civil Liberties Union, NAACP, Neighbor to Neighbor Massachusetts Campaign, the Governor's designee, the retired Justice of the Trial Court, the Chair of the Board, the Attorney General's designee, and designee of the Chief Counsel of the Committee for Public Counsel Services, together represent diverse stakeholders. Massachusetts leads the nation in education, healthcare, and other areas. This review board, the review board contemplated by this legislation, can be a useful tool to enable us to enjoy the best police services in the country, and I urge you to support this bill.
Well done. Any questions? Yes.
Good job, Representative Bowdoin. I think obviously everything's going on, real estate litigation behind this. Review strikes me that the law enforcement representation suggested in the legislation is a little late here. Why would that be?
Well, we have a representative from the Police Association. We have the Attorney General, 2 law enforcement agencies.
I wouldn't automatically think that the Attorney General's office was
It's a work in progress. I would invite the board, the committee, to discuss amendments.
that's the purpose of it.
But trying to bring bring together all the different parts of the community, or larger community, and focus on this. And, you know, I've practiced in the criminal justice system for over 30 years, and from time to time, in one county or another, we've been able to observe problems in one department or another. It's been too often these take many years to resolve, to successfully resolve. I'm thinking that a board like this would be helpful not only to our residents and citizens, but also to law enforcement employees themselves. Because oftentimes, it's our police that are the victims of situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just want to register my concern and reservations on this bill. Coming off of what Chairman Naughton said, number one, the representation. I see a strong lack of experience in the groups that are mentioned here. I also would say that I have great faith in the administration of the police departments and the district attorneys' abilities to oversee these investigations. And I would just add that I don't think we've seen in Massachusetts some of the issues that we've seen across the country. So I express my reservation. I appreciate you bringing it, but I have great concerns.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to, on the other bills, express my support for Senate 1313, the workplace safety for nurses, and also on the Trust Act. Senator Albert spoke on Senate 1258 and House 1240.
We noted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Vieira? Thanks, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee. We're here to testify on behalf of the post-resolve, the Peace Officers Standard and Training Resolve, H2192, project that, Mr. Chairman, you started through the good work of a special commission with these training recommendations that said that this was the direction that we should head in the Commonwealth. And since that time, the Section 22 Commission that looked at the transfer of sheriffs from the county systems to the state system also recommended going to a post model for training. And so today we are here to show a broad-based support that's been built over the last couple of years to have a pathway to post. How do we get there? And I think the best way for us to get there is to get all of the key players in a room together to draft what this system would look like to a granular detail that we can prepare legislation to bring it back to the general board for consideration. When we started this initiative, I was told you'll never get the unions on board. And so over the last couple of years, we've worked on that. And so today with me, we have the New England Police Benevolent Association on board. We have the Mass Coalition of Police on board. And when you get your benediction at the end of the session from Sergeant Machado, you'll hear that the Mass Police Association is on board. So Representative Holmes and I have been working. We continue to try to build support throughout the community. And so today I would just like to recognize Chief Brooks from the Mass Chiefs of Police Association and Chief Pollard from the Association of Kansas Law Enforcement Administrators, Paul Larkham from the Benevolent Association, and Ken Scanzio from the Coalition of Police to say a brief words about their support for this. And Sheriff Donlin, who's the head of the Sheriff's Training Commission, was unable to be here this morning, but he did send by email this morning letters of support from the Mass Sheriff's Association.
You brought the 27 Yankees. Good work.
We're really just here to, Mr. Chairman, to express our support of this bill. I do love traveling around the country and doing police training in various states, and I can tell you this is how most states are run, with a post system that really brings all of the various entities together and sets standards. Today, a company can come into Massachusetts and offer police training. There's really no vetting of that process. We really should be rolling in parole and sheriffs and harbor masses and to make sure that everybody's on the same page. This really makes a great deal of sense, I think. It would bring us in a conformity with the rest of the country.
Representing all the college and university and hospital public safety departments, we're very supportive of this type of training to standardize it for all the states. And that's what I would think.
Good morning, Chairman Phillippe, Chairman Milwaukee.
See you again.
Good to see you. Board of Water, and should be wrapping up Monday. tie in the comments I have to make. The Mass Coalition of Police is also in support of House 2192. If the committee and the legislature feels that this is the way that we're going to go, we'd be honored to be on the committee. Having said that, what I'd like to do is just bounce back in time a little bit. In 2008, the resolutions of the last governor put in place that there would be a study committee. The governor put me on to represent municipal police officers and police unions. This just so happens that this commission that was put together was chaired by Senator Temple. And he put a lot of hard work into it. We made a lot of headway. We spent 2 years on this process. And there's a number of things that we came out of. Two of the things I want to mention that we came out that we found out and we understood was funding. And what I handed out sort of a quick reference, this is in this booklet, it has the whole study on the 2010, is that the funding levels were up and down. As you can see from FY88 to FY08, the funding was, every year was up and down. It was never a steady amount of funding, which created major problems for the program to update, to have any understanding of what they were going to have for monies the following year. The other important thing that we found out in that last meeting, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of change when Representative starts this one here. At that point in time, Commonwealth of Massachusetts was spending $187 to train each police officer. $187, which was the lowest state amount spent in the whole United States. Next to the bottom was Washington. And at that point in time, they were $368, which was almost double what Massachusetts was spending. You know, there's a bill that ties in with this, and it's Senate 1311, which was filed by Senator Hill. And I gotta tell you, Senator Hill, before we can do anything, we've got to fund a program for police training. The most important thing for the police unions that I represent is to have the best training we can have for our police officers. You know, stop and you think, we had 9/11, planes came out from Boston Globe Airport, we had the bombings at the marathon, and nothing's happened. It's been 6 years since we completed that last study, and I found all the defects in what we're doing right now for the police training across the state, and specifically the municipal police. So I would also be recorded in favor of 1311. One other thing, when any one of the members on the committee dial 911 call for service, or their family dials 911 call for service, it's a municipal police officer that's going to come to your house and try to help your situation. I would just hope that we keep that in the back of our mind when we discuss the funding issues. Thank you very much.
I just want to add, Mr. Chairman, that during the drafting of the bill, I did visit some key law enforcement agencies, and they reached out to me. So the MBTA Police Department should be added if we move forward with this resolve, as well as the Boston Police itself, who has a very active academy in credentialing here in the city of Boston, and the UMass Police.
Very quickly, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Members of the committee, Paul Arkham from the New England Police Benevolent Association, and I'll echo what has been said at this table, and we're in full support of this bill. We're also full support of the bill that has the funding stream, and we do provide for our police officers the best training available in our corrections offices, our sheriffs, everyone across the board. That's what we need, that's where we're going, that's the direction this world is going in. When we send our guys out on the street, they need to have the best training behind them. I say that as a retired police captain, as a former training officer. I'm also saying it as a father of a police officer today. I want to make sure that he's got the best training. I thank the committee.
Doing great work. And Representative Muir, thanks for carrying this. Done a great job over the last 4 years. This is something I've been chasing for almost a decade now. And I don't think that you have, starting with Secretary Berg and now continuing with Secretary Bennett, the Training Council and the Mass Chiefs get enough credit for what they do based on the failing, is on the legislature in the sense that we see with the fire service, how well the fire service has progressed with the funding that it gets. It's always there. We're 4 years away from $2.4 million, which is about $6 million short of what you needed for the basic training program that you need each year for our officers. And we depend, it's not just recruits, it's the day-to-day officer. When an officer retires, who jumps in? And I think we're leaving a lot of officers. I've had many conversations with chiefs and union officials about how many officers aren't getting trained, and you guys are stepping in during the fiscal collapse of 08 and 09. The Mass Chiefs funded the academy because the state money wasn't there. And it is a way for us to get this off the general appropriation and move it to more consumer use, which it is, based on what the fire service does. And I'm hopeful that we'll get there at some point. But now we're at $5 million. We hope to be able to continue a level fund of $5 million. But if that's not there, there's a hole in our offices. And you guys have done a tremendous job getting our offices into the 21st century. On mental health, on people with disabilities, and getting smarter and tougher on crime. So I'll just open it up to anyone in the... You said it all. Once again, no, I could go on, and I want to get to more people.
And before I step away, just on an unrelated topic, as long as I'm here, I just want to go five on it. At the request of the Massachusetts Police Association and Senate 1261, and I just want to register as the association in support of that. They would establish a crime of felony evading. Currently running from the police today in a vehicle pursuit carries only a $100 fine. Clearly, almost every other state has a felony evading statute. The idea is that it puts some risk to the driver if he decides to run, if he's got warrants, or if he's OUI, or for any other reason that when the police light him up. Right now, the only risk in Massachusetts is another $100, and it should be steeper. So most states have a felony evading. This will do that. I appreciate you hearing me.
Thanks very much, Chief. Excellent job. Commissioner Evans?
Senator Tilly,
yes.
if I may, please.
Yes, sure.
If,
Sorry about that.
we could just be recorded,
Yeah.
the Mass Coalition, please.
Yeah.
Oppose the House 2182 in support of Senate 1283, in support of Senate 1307, in support of Senate 1309, and 1301. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Commissioner, thanks for your patience.
Good afternoon, Chairman Timothy, Chairman Martin, and members of the committee. My name is William Evans. I'm the Police Commissioner in the City of Boston. On behalf of Mayor Martin J. Walsh, I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 2107, an act to provide concurrent judicial authority to transport properties filed by Representative Ray Collins, who represents my neighborhood of Boston. Before I begin to discuss this bill, I'd like to briefly speak about another bill before you do it, which is Senate Bill 1257, an act to promote the use of body camera by law enforcement. The Boston Police is currently in the process of implementing a pilot program, which I hope will be operational in May of 2016. The pilot will equip 100 patrol officers with body cameras and will run for a period of 6 months. Once the 6-month program is completed, the data will be analyzed and the determination will be made whether to implement the program on a permanent basis. Mayor Walsh and I have decided to start off with a pilot program because there's many issues that need to be further vetted before full implementation of this process goes through. To name a few, there's an enormous cost associated with a citywide permanent program. Significant personal privacy questions, and there are potential detention and discovery issues associated with filming citizens. Before the city can commit financial resources to the department-wide program, the mayor and I must be assured that implementing the body camera permanently is in the best interest of the city as a whole. While I support legislation that would lend much needed support and incentives to the police department to implement body camera, I ask that the police department be given time to implement this program and analyze it before an unfunded statewide mandate is adopted. I do recognize that body cameras may be a tool to increase community trust, but be assured that the Boston Police Department is working in many other ways to achieve this goal. Relationship building occurs through hard work, and the officers, including my command staff, who are out there continually in the community, making a difference in people's lives. As I mentioned, the primary reason that I'm here is to talk about concurrent jurisdiction on mass tort fraud. I've been here many times before on this issue. As the current statute reads, the Boston Police Department does not have police jurisdiction on mass tort fraud, which covers much of the South Boston waterfront, sections of East Boston, and other areas of the city. This lapse in the law does not allow citizens who reside in that area and those who visit countless hotels, restaurants, and events to have the protection in the emergency response of the Boston Police Department. This amendment is necessary to give tax-paying residents, businesses, and visitors of Boston the benefit of both the state police and the Boston police on mass tort problems. And again, just go up. I have the utmost respect for the state police on this issue. They're a highly professional institution. This is solely about us both having jurisdiction down. The Seaport District is a thriving part of the South Boston community, and those who live, work, and visit there should receive the same services available to my neighborhood, the whole of South Boston. This joint jurisdiction is specific to mass tort property only. The state police and local police have concurrent jurisdiction on all other property. There is no logical reason why mass tort property should be treated any differently than DCR property, than MBTA property, than state roads and parks. Boston Fire and Boston EMS are able to respond to emergencies in the Seaport. How ridiculous is it that the Boston Police cannot go there? And the same should be true for us. The Boston Police Department's ability to respond to emergency and non-emergencies is unclear, and therefore statutory change is needed. Jurisdiction cannot be conferred by agreement alone, but must be conferred by statute. This proposed amendment was modeled after language passed relative to the casinos and grants jurisdiction to local law enforcement and requires a MOU to establish roles and responsibilities between the state and local enforcement in consultation with the mass tort. This is simply a matter of public safety. The proposed legislation does not take away any authority from the state police. It only gives the Boston Police the same jurisdiction as the state police in our city of Boston. This is about ensuring that all citizens, businesses, and visitors receive the same police service in all neighborhoods of the city. To carve out a small section of the seaport and essentially eliminate the Boston Police is a clear disservice to the public who pay big taxes down. Public safety and public policy easily weigh in favor of guaranteeing the public is as protected as possible. Anything short of concurrent jurisdiction is only a band-aid to a larger problem. In a time where the safety of the public is paramount, we should be putting as many resources as possible into ensuring safety, not restricting police resources. Failing to fix this important issue could have grave consequences, and those consequences that I'm here trying to prevent from occurring with 2107. So, again, I've been here numerous times. I continually ask one question only. No one has an answer to why we're prohibited from going. I always ask people, give me one good reason why we shouldn't be down there, and nobody can answer that question. The other issue is, I know you're from a lot of cities and towns. I don't think you'd appreciate your local police not being able to go into a major section of the city over a foolish jurisdiction. More so, that area is bustling, there's more hotels. GE potentially is moving down there. Traffic issues are major down there. To have this dysfunctional jurisdictional setup is ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. I don't think a lot of people down there realize it, but it's time to fix it. I've been here, I think we've been trying for 8 years now to try to fix this, and no one seems to want to step up and get it done. On behalf of me and the mayor, I hope today that we can make some progress on this particular issue. With that being said, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Any questions?
panel? Thank you very much, Commissioner. We'll make a concerted effort. Sheriff Tom? Keep people safe, we're going to get you back to Bristol County.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here to testify in opposition of Senate Bill 1258, and I restore trust in Massachusetts law enforcement. Chairman Penalty, Chairman Mountain, all the members of the Joint Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security, thank you for holding this hearing. This legislation enacted to restore community trust in Massachusetts law enforcement does the complete opposite of what it suggests. The citizens and legal residents of Massachusetts trust their law enforcement officers to use every resource available to keep them safe. It is no secret that following the attacks on the World Trade Center, that law enforcement agencies at the local, state, and federal level have been moving at an accelerated pace to establish partnerships, sharing equipment, intelligence, and training to enhance the ability to identify lawbreakers and keep our cities and communities safe. It's unimaginable that we would create a law that prohibits any law enforcement agency from accessing information from partnering agencies or use their facility to conduct interviews and other investigative business that may identify the likes of a Muhammad Atta or a Boston Marathon bomber prior to the attack. The notion that we should not provide information to ICE because someone hasn't been convicted is ludicrous. These individuals were never convicted of crime. Making matters even worse is the fact that this legislation prohibits Massachusetts law enforcement from notifying Immigration Customs Enforcement that a person who may have a deportation warrant or other issue with the federal agency about their release date or even the fact that they have been released is also undermining law enforcement. This law also goes as far as to prohibit the sharing of information such as booking lists, information regarding inmates, such as radical extremist behavior in our facilities, or incarceration status. Did we learn nothing from the recent murder of Catherine Steinle, who was shot by a known dangerous criminal who was reported several times? It was bad enough that this felon was released, but the federal agency that wanted him held wasn't even notified by telephone that he was about to be put back into the community. At a time we're faced with increased dangers, we don't need laws that prohibit law enforcement from accessing more tools to help protect the people of the Commonwealth from becoming victims of terrorist acts or other criminal behavior. I'd like to point out that this legislation would cause law enforcement officers to violate federal law. Title 8 of U.S. Code 1324 reads in paragraph A, subsection 2, it is a violation for anyone who has, quote, knowing or reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, enter, or remains in the United States in violation of the law, conceals, harbors, or shields from detection, or attempts to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection such alien in any place, including any building or means of transportation. There has been a legal debate, members of the committee, that somehow we would not be able to hold someone on an administrative warrant for deportation or what have you at the time that they're about to be released. We couldn't hold them for 48 hours as we did in the past. ICE changed that and said, just notify us that the day that you're releasing them, if we're not there when they get released, it's our responsibility. This would not allow us, it would prohibit us from calling ICE and telling them about these people being released. So in closing, I'll leave you with two questions. Why would anyone support legislation that would place our dedicated men and women in Massachusetts law enforcement in the crosshairs of having to make a conscious decision to violate federal law? And secondly, why would any lawmaker want law enforcement to have less rather than more tools to keep our community and our citizens and our legal residents safe? I'm respectfully asking that this committee vote unfavorably on this bill, sending a clear message that we are united in our efforts to give law enforcement the ability to use every tool available to prevent terrorist or criminal acts against innocent people, and that we will not We will not conceal or give cover to lawbreakers under any circumstances. I thank you for your time and entertaining questions at this point.
As always, thanks very much, Sheriff. Appreciate the collaboration on it. We're joined by Representative Whalen from the Cape. Any questions for the Sheriff? You're not?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Sergeant Daly? Is Sergeant Pullman?
He's tied up, sorry, you will be okay.
Senate 1313, Karen Coughlin,
Yes.
my favorite bill.
I wonder why.
Welcome, Karen.
Thank you for having us here today. My name is Karen Coughlin, and I am the Vice President of the Massachusetts Nurses Association, representing approximately 23,000 nurses and healthcare professionals, including physicians, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, dentists, speech, physical therapists working in multiple departments and agencies across the Commonwealth. I'm also a registered nurse with 31 years of experience with the Department of Mental Health at Taunton State Hospital. I am also a victim of workplace violence. I am here today to represent my colleagues who work in health facilities across the state, both public and private. We are the ones on the front lines, and we strongly support Senate Bill 1313, an act requiring healthcare employees to develop and implement programs to prevent workplace violence. Violence across the country and against healthcare workers is on the rise. The 2015 report for the Centers for Disease Control found that between 2012 and 2014, incidents of violence nearly doubled for nurses and nurse assistants. Violence against healthcare workers accounts for nearly as many injuries as in all other industries combined. That is a rate 5 times greater than the average worker in our country with more non-fatal incidents of workplace violence than against police or correctional officers. My colleague Kathy Metzger, who is here today, will speak to a recent survey demonstrating how bad the problem is in Massachusetts. But this isn't just about data. Though there is much data that is available to support this legislation, this is also about people. My colleagues and I have experienced a broken collarbone, a whiplash injury from being jerked around by the hair with such force that the staff member was unable to return to work for almost 1 year. A strangulation that came close to death. A kick to the chest that resulted in back spasms, bruised ribs, and the need for months of physical therapy. A nurse colleague who was punched repeatedly in the head just after narrowly being avoided being hit over the head with a chair. Another member of my staff sustained a concussion as a result of being attacked without warning and repeatedly punched in the head. Another suffered the permanent loss of her peripheral vision in one eye. And yet another colleague suffered a broken jaw. I have 6 colleagues who will never return to work because of the trauma they experienced in just my workplace alone. Similar incidents are happening every day in hospitals across the state. Every day, patients and healthcare providers are increasingly put at risk by workplace violence. A hospital should be a place where a patient can go to heal, and nurses and other healthcare providers can provide care in a safe environment. Unfortunately, hospitals are growing increasingly violent for both the employees and the patients. This bill takes steps forward to making hospitals safer by requiring those employers to perform annual risk assessments and identify factors which could place their employees at risk for workplace violence. It requires them to look at factors like working hours, staffing levels, public access to areas, working in high crime areas, and any other factor that might affect safety. Hospitals would then need to write and develop a written violence prevention plan and put measures in place to minimize those risks. The bill also requires the creation of an in-house crisis response team to support the victims of workplace violence. This is extremely important because in addition to just the physical injuries alone, victims often suffer emotional trauma and anxiety associated with returning to work. You'll hear today from nurses who have experienced both of those. A good step was taken by the legislature 5 years ago to protect healthcare workers when an act relative to assault and battery on healthcare providers was signed into law. Now we must take the next step in protecting nurses, putting a plan in place that will prevent violence in our hospitals. I strongly encourage the Committee on Public Safety to support this legislation and help to ensure that hospitals are a place of healing and peace, not violence. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Ellen Fowler. Thank you for having us here. And I also work with parents, so I'm not going to do the same thing. But I also work with the Department of Mental Health and at Toronto State Hospital, and I have been the leader for the Assault Staff Action Program, which helps people who have been assaulted, now the past, which is the first day support team. And I'm here to represent my colleagues in the Department of Mental Health. We are the people on the front lines. We see the danger for both ourselves, for our patients, and individuals who become violent. We strongly support Senate Bill 1313, which would require the hospitals to do those risk assessments necessary to get these programs in place. I believe the absence of the law requiring healthcare employers to have comprehensive workplace violence program in place has come as a great cost to me, my colleagues, and all the individuals we serve. In my volunteer work, I work with people who have been assaulted. I offer support, counseling. Many of these individuals suffer PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, if they do not receive timely intervention. We don't have enough people on these teams, so it is imperative that they make this a law. In addition to the threat of physical violence that we face every day, we are concerned about the diminished care to the other patients, because the patients are also affected. You know, they witness these events. Sometimes these patients are patient, so it's difficult to provide the care that they need so that they can actually get well. The acts of violence and anticipation of these acts has taken a toll on myself and my colleagues. It makes you weary. Every time you hear a loud noise, you have that exaggerated startle response because you anticipate, even when people speak loudly sometimes, that something bad is going to happen. Over the past 23 years, I have participated in many groups, both local and statewide. The Inpatient Safety Task Force that the Department of Mental Health had, and Karen also served on it. I have submitted all the recommendations that these individuals, all of us across the state, have come up with. But despite the hours of work and the dozens of recommendations, the work of these groups has been ignored. They never act on it. Karen and I were both flabbergasted the day we found out that we were done. Our work was done. Nothing happened. It was a problem. Without this law requiring healthcare employees to have these programs in place, they are free to ignore any recommendations or best practices. Last session, this committee provided a favorable report on this legislation. I ask that you again, I implore you, support Senate Bill 1313 favorably by this committee. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm in strong support of this Bill 1313, Senate Bill 1313. My name is Kathy Masker, and before I retired, I was a nurse for nearly 30 years at Brockton Hospital, aka Signature Healthcare. And it had been witnessed firsthand to assault on nurses. There was one nurse that I knew that was almost choked to death. A patient was hiding in an alcove up on the psych unit, and as she was walking to take care of another patient, he came out at her and throttled her to the ground. And she's no longer working because of neck and back injuries from that. Unfortunately today, I'm here today to tell you that things have only gotten worse. It's not getting better. 10 years ago, I worked with my fellow nurses in the Massachusetts Nurses Association to investigate how prevalent workplace violence was in Massachusetts hospitals. And the survey showed that things were bad across the state and across facilities. Then, from November 2015 to January 2016, the M&A conducted another survey and found that nurses, including members of M&A and non-members, the results showed that healthcare professionals on the front lines already know the problem is even more serious today, and employers are still not doing anything to protect the staff. The survey showed that workplace violence is a widespread, dangerous problem. 86% of nurses reported that they have personally been physically or verbally assaulted at least once in the past 2 years. That's nearly 9 out of 10 nurses. Of this, 86%, 58 report they have been kicked, 48% report that they've been punched. Nurses have reported the use of weapons, knives, guns, scissors, syringes, even objects in the hospital, the chairs and things that they pick up and use as weapons and projectiles. The level of violence takes a toll on nurses. 83% reported anticipating, like these ladies have said, violent or abusive events the past 2 years. 41% reported difficulty concentrating following a violent incident. 34% reported lingering problems such as fear and anxiety when they return to work after an assault. These numbers are very disturbing, but not surprising to those of us who work in the field every day. Most discouraging are the nurses' answers regarding the response from their employers. 88% of those who have been assaulted report that no relief was provided so they could leave the workplace and get help. 93% reported that the workplace violence training they received from their employer was not adequate. Only 19% reported that their employers had been supportive and willing to find solutions to address the problem in the workplace. Why do Massachusetts nurses believe do Massachusetts nurses believe that would help? A range of solutions. Many of them are included in this legislation. 82 report preventative training likely to improve conditions. 91% report training on legal rights for the assaulted would help improve conditions, so they would know once they're assaulted what their ability to get help. 90% report better admission policies likely to improve conditions. 83 report policies and procedures to address violence likely to improve conditions, and that's up to the hospitals to do that. Vast majority report equipment enhancements like improved lighting, control access systems, panic buttons, and closed-circuit TV monitoring would improve these conditions. In many cases, hospitals are so afraid to show the public they're secure that they fail to provide security for staff and patients. If you don't act, healthcare employees have no incentive to do anything. That's why this bill in this law is very imperative, because unless they're held accountable, there's no change. This has been going on for over 20 years, and it really needs to stop, because we're losing nurses to this problem, and it shouldn't be. I mean, we're there to take care of patients, not to be a punching bag. Thank you.
Any questions? Anybody?
Thanks very much.
Thank you. We're doing 7 people. I just want to let you know we have another panel also. Okay. Absolutely. Thank you. Excuse me, Rep. Purdue is coming up. Unless you go.
Start the clock, we'll be quick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm here to speak in favor of House Bill 2098, which is a mechanism for providing first responder law enforcement training for folks in their interactions with folks on the autism spectrum. I am here today with one of my constituents, Lydia Brown. Lydia, I first met when Lydia was in high school, I think, and she quickly progressed from there through Georgetown University and is now a first-year law student at Northeastern University. For the purposes of this discussion, I think it's important to recognize that Lydia chairs the Massachusetts Developmental Disabilities Council and has continued, since I first met Lydia, to be an advocate and kind of continue to build a portfolio and knowledge in these areas. I bring the bill forward recognizing the challenges that the Commonwealth and the law enforcement community face in terms of funding need and training, both municipal level and at the state police level. I commend you for, excuse me, for the work that you've done so far. And I just want you to know I'm very mindful of that as a challenge that the Commonwealth faces. That having been said, I believe this is a critical area where we can do a great job of public policy, helping folks that law enforcement interact with and helping law enforcement itself do the best job it can in working in some very, very challenging situations. And with that, I will turn it over to Lee.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. I am, as Paul said, currently suffering through what I like to term 1L hell. So I am currently skipping contracts. This is much more interesting. I want to. I am hoping that everything in this semester is irrelevant after passing the bar because I do not like there to be math in my law. That is not a pleasant experience. So I have been working, as some of you may know, since 2009 to push for the passage of this bill because I believe ultimately in the principle underlying it. That is a principle of harm reduction. I don't believe that passing this bill to require training is going to be a magic elixir that will solve every possible problem related to police or disability, and that's especially so as a person of color. But what I do believe is that passing this bill can have an overall net positive effect, and it is one that begs the question as to why it should not be passed. There's ample evidence to suggest that autistic people and those who have other similar developmental disabilities are very likely to end up interacting with law enforcement. 83% of women with developmental disabilities will be raped at least once in their lifetime. More than half of that number will be raped at least 10 times by the age of 18. That does not count what happens after the age of 18. The statistic for men with developmental disabilities is 38%. All of these are believed to be low estimates. The likelihood that an autistic person or someone with a different developmental disability will encounter a law enforcement officer in any capacity, a routine capacity, as a victim of a crime, as a suspect of a crime, is 7 times greater than that of the general population. I want to share those statistics because they illustrate the fact that autistic people are very likely to end up in violent or abusive situations, whether that is through family violence, violence in the home. Every single year, I and other disabled activists organize a day of mourning for the hundreds of disabled people, many of them autistic, who were murdered by their family members or other caregivers. Every year, and every year the list of names that we read grows exponentially longer. We can no longer fit it on 2 pages in a small font. That is pretty impressive and not in a very good way. Autistic people are also disproportionately likely to end up in police-involved violent situations, whether that is through tasing, through excessive use of force, and sometimes through police killings. There was a highly publicized case in Maryland involving a man with Down syndrome, which is another developmental disability, who was killed by police when he left the movie theater. That case spurred the state of Maryland to become the 7th state to pass very similar legislation to this. There are now 7. I used to say there were 6. In California, over the past couple of years, in our community, we are aware of 2 cases that came to light in Los Angeles. Those of Stephen Eugene Washington and Mohammed Usman Chowdhury. Both of them were young autistic men of color, one Black American and one Pakistani American, who were killed by law enforcement in encounters on the street. These situations are inexcusable and entirely avoidable. I think that if this bill were to be passed, what it would do is provide law enforcement with some tools to better recognize situations where a person is struggling to communicate in the same way as the officer, where a person is struggling with sensory overload, as I was in the back of this room. This is terrible. There's too many people and the light is terrible, which I notice every time I come to the Statehouse. I testify routinely.
It's not just you.
It's terrible. Some of the rooms upstairs have the lights that buzz, and it's awful. Imagine what it's like to have an entire cadre of police cars with the lights on and the sirens going. The likelihood that an autistic person or someone with a different developmental disability, their differences in communication and bodily movement or in reaction to sensory stimuli could be misinterpreted as non-compliance, as disrespect, or in the worst case scenario as aggression, is simply too high. This training would allow police to have some education as to alternative strategies to use to escalate the situation and come to the most effective resolution possible for everybody involved. I urge this committee to report this bill favorably. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lydia. Any questions? Excellent job.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and to the committee for their time for taking me out of turn. And thank you for your work with the nurses. I hope the committee has the opportunity to move that.
Thanks very much.
I will hand testimony copies to the again.
No problem. Thank you.
The other panel from the M&A?
Welcome back. How are you guys this evening?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for allowing me today. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership on this bill. My name is Dan Lincoln, I'm retired Superintendent Chief of Boston Police Department. I now work for Kroll. We've been retained by the M&A to assist them in helping make security in hospitals better. I had a busy day this morning, Mr. Chairman. I had a client I had to drop off a product to. I went to their facility. They knew I was coming. My name was left at the security desk. I was given a badge. I went upstairs to see my client. I didn't tell my accountant I was going to try and drop off my W-2 forms to him, so I stopped at his office. I wasn't on the list. Security had to call out. They had to clear me. And then I was allowed up to my accountant's office to drop off my W-2. If I were to walk into many of the hospitals right now in this region, you and I and anyone else could go wherever we wanted to on security. They have policies for women, for example, from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The question I have is, why am I not a threat at 6:45? Why am I not a threat at 8:30 p.m.? What changes? Right? When this issue was brought to us, people posited that we were trying to make the hospitals lockdown places. And then, Mr. Chairman, as I did come here today, I went through a security check, went through a magnetometer and an x-ray process. Rightfully so. Based on the risk that this institution faces, you have to put steps in place that are reasonable. We're not looking to do that at the hospitals, but there are certain things that they could do to make matters safer for the nurses and their employees. Very simple steps. M&A has been trying to work collaboratively to come to a joint shared culture of security with the hospital environment so they can take steps to keep their employees and their patients safe. I credit this body and the former governor with the passage of legislation that made it a crime to assault healthcare workers. We'd like to see that established over the hospitals by signage and enforcement of that. Our nurses are very often subject to victimization of crime. We had a recent nurse who was assaulted, and she was home afraid the individuals were going to identify her and come to her home. It was the M&A and myself, and thank God the Raymond Police Department, who went to her home, calmed her down, and walked her through that process. No one else reached out to see how she was doing after she was the victim of a violent assault. We didn't change fire laws on our own. We now have sprinkler systems, we have fire drills, we have processes that have made it a safe place for our kids to go to schools, workers to go to facilities, and that happens because of institution of legislation. Asbestos removal is now coded and has processed it. It's the way to deal with it because legislation came into play. If you talk to security directors around the state, and M&A wanted to make sure I'm clear, this is not criticism of professional security officials charged with security at our hospitals. Very professional individuals doing the best they can with often limited budgets and administrations who do not share the same idea of security as they do. They do a great job trying to protect the staff every day. They need help to do it, and we feel that this bill will provide the incentive for hospitals to have a yearly conversation, a yearly evaluation if they're doing the best practices possible to keep workers and patients safe. This is safety for everyone in the hospital facility. And this is not an on-camp. We're not looking for metal detectors. We're not looking for x-ray machines. We're looking forward for common sense approaches to make the hospital facility safe for all. Just like it's safe for my accountant and just like it was safe for my client today.
Long overdue.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Trish Powers and I'm a registered nurse. I've worked in the operating room trauma unit at Brigham Women's Hospital for almost 25 years now. I am also elected chairperson for the hospital Mass Nurses Association Bowdoin unit, which represents more than 3,200 registered nurses at the Brigham. 7 months ago, I testified in favor of the House version of this bill. I spoke of the trauma of last January's fatal shooting of my friend, Dr. Michael Davidson, and the violent assaults against nurses following that tragedy. I also talked about the failure of hospital management to respond. Since that hearing last summer, Brigham nurses have worked hard to improve security, but without a law requiring hospitals to work with staff to adopt violence prevention programs, we face an uphill battle. Our efforts have been met with half-hearted fixes. Management has failed to address underlying security problems. The hospital has received 2 OSHA warning letters within the last 6 weeks, yet they refuse to make concrete promises. I am sad and frustrated to report that Brigham nurses feel less safe now than they did over a year ago. After this shooting, we tried to make our voices heard on security, but the hospital gave us only lip service. Brigham and Partners Healthcare refused to value our input or put into place our ideas which were generated on the front lines of patient care. We were forced to bring our concerns into contract negotiations last September. Since then, security has been our top priority at the bargaining table. We have tried to reach agreement on issues like lockdown procedures and active shooter drills. As you heard, Dan Linsky, and I thank God every day that we have him, used his years of experience with the Boston Police Department to identify security flaws and proposals. In December, our concerns were validated by OSHA. The federal agency sent a warning letter to the hospital outlining 14 ways to improve security. They got another letter just a week ago. The recommendations mirrored our own. Yet 6 months into negotiations, hospital management has not put a single security proposal into enforceable contract language. Any changes made so far only happened because of our pressure. But what they are doing falls short. Just last week, Brigham staff saw an example of management's effective response. Under pressure from staff nurses with Dan Linsky's guidance, the hospital had finally made it possible to secure the entrances of the Shapiro building. Management announced last Monday that access to Shapiro would be restricted from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The next morning, a staff nurse reported that at 5:45 a.m., people were accessing the Shapiro without security checks. And I'd like to add in street clothes, not in hospital garb. We want even better security around the clock, but the hospital won't even secure entrances overnight at the hospital, as promised. Brigham nurses have more ability to advocate for hospital safety than many healthcare professionals. We stand together, licensed by the state to protect and care for our patients. We know our concerns are valid. We know our voices are protected. Despite that strength, management can still refuse to listen. This should terrify healthcare professionals across the Commonwealth. Without this law, safety can take a backseat to the stubbornness and profits of the hospital industry. Every healthcare worker in the Commonwealth would be protected under this law, whether or not they are unionized. Unions should not be a substitute for good government regulations to keep people safe. And I'd just like to add on a personal note, just because my fellow staff in the trauma unit knew I was coming here today. And I'd like to add that it saddens us very much that Brigham Women's Hospital CEO Betsy Nagel and the Chief Nursing Officer Jackie Somerville have made comments that somehow the nurses are taking advantage of our friend Mike Davidson's murder. I was working that day in the trauma unit when Mike came. My friends, my colleagues, the nurses and doctors of the Brighams worked for 10 hours to save Mike's life and we were unsuccessful. It is absolutely, so sad that our employer would imply such a thing. And also, the other day when I was in the trauma unit working on the trauma, the doctors, the nurses, the aides, everyone just said to me to bring that message to you guys and told me to keep fighting. So on a personal level, as a friend of a person who was murdered at my hospital, that's my message as well. Thank you.
I'm going to be successful this year on 1313. Are there any questions from the panel? Oh, shoot, you go to my point. partially rhetorical. But why, as in so many other things, and if anybody from the previous panel wants to testify, why aren't just the nurses here carrying the water on us? Where are the docs? Where's the Mass Medical Association? Pull them kicking and screaming into the opioid crisis. Why aren't they here on this? I mean, I know you probably don't have that. It's not your responsibility to answer.
I will say my personal opinion though, as I worked at the Brigham many years, I am good friends with the doctors, very good friends, and the Brigham's been very good to me. I want to make it clear I love Brigham Women's Hospital. I think we're an excellent hospital. We give excellent care. I think under our prior leadership, Dr. Garrett Gottlieb and Ray Hickey, Chief Nursing Officer, this wouldn't be happening. I think this is partners. For myself, I feel as partners, and they're putting profits before safety for everyone. But also the doctors are not protected. The doctors who do speak out, they get retaliation. They do not have that free. You think, like, I think sometimes the public think, I work with surgeons, trauma surgeons, and they think, oh, a trauma surgeon, they could have that ego to speak out or something. They don't. They don't have that protection. They could be fired at the Brigham. Look at Dr. Dennis Burke, the Mass General, who spoke out about double looking on surgeries, is a perfect example. A world-renowned surgeon, also a friend of mine. So the doctors do not have that freedom that we do, and they too, they support us very much. Mike is a good friend of mine. I'm friends with his best friends, fellow surgeons. I've been, Mike was murdered. He did my MS Challenge fundraiser. He was a member of the band. He's a friend of ours, and this came home to us in the most awful way. And since that time, I've had fellow nurses, a few who are here today, fellow nurses, one who had a 10-inch knife pulled to her throat, another nurse who was threatened by a family member. In fact, he called the Dan Ray radio show saying that he was going to come to the Brigham and get the nurses on the 12th floor. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. We've had knives, we've had blood squirted in our faces that were HIV and Hep C positive. A knife just in the NICU, a nurse in the intensive care unit in the family waiting area just last week. This is happening, and if it can happen at the Brigham, a top 10 hospitals in the nation, if not the world, then what's happening at our fellow hospitals? You say, why is someone here from the Mass General not here from Mass General nursing? Because they're afraid. They get retaliated against, and I will tell you at the Brigham, I have the nurses that I say are here today, they have been retaliated against, and their fear is minimized. When you have a 10-inch knife pulled on you, and you're told somehow it was your fault by a family member. I mean, it's insane. And I think with Dan Linsky here, like I said, I thank God every day that I have family members of Boston police officers put me in touch with him, because Dan, we've had dozens of nurses physically attacked, punched, guns, everything pulled on them just since the shooting. And Dan is the one who's reached out to them. He's the one who's helped them. He's helped us file Boston police reports.
You're kind and you're gracious to stick up for your friends who are doctors. And individually, yes, they are at risk of being retaliated against. But they have an organization too.
I wish they would.
So I'd like to reiterate what she said, but Tricia's correct. Right now it's the nurses who are standing up, because the nurses at the M&A, because we have protected ability to be able to voice our concerns and stand up for our patients because we are unionized. And many of our colleagues, the doctors, they do not have that luxury, should I say. But the other thing that I would say is that the nurses are at the forefront of this, and because oftentimes we are the ones who spend the most time with the patients. We are the direct care workers, the frontline workers, and so in general, we are the ones who are bearing the brunt of most of the workplace violence and assault.
Yeah, I agree with the doctors. I wish they would join forces, and hopefully they will, because quite frankly, we're not talking about hypothetical Brigham. I mean, a doctor was murdered, 42 years old, with children, and one not even born yet. And I will say, the retaliation thing is big in Partners Healthcare. It's big. I myself, I'm head of the union. I mean, I don't get paid a dime to be the chairperson of the union. I just, do it for the insanity, I guess. But I'm passionate about it, and I feel that I'm a bit protective, and even myself, my colleagues who have been beaten and had knives pulled on them, they've had retaliation. It's then they're gonna go try to find something that maybe you didn't dot a T or cross an I, or maybe you didn't sign a med off right on time. So they go after that instead of the knife being pulled. Or, you know, I had a nurse who was beaten in July and admitted to our emergency room. The security guard pulled off the patient, violent 300-pound psychotic patient, and she was attacked. She was in the emergency room. Now 4 hours later, they pulled the security guard out again because of staffing, and another nurse was attacked. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I can't believe it. I'm just so sad that I'm here. I wish it wasn't the case, but and I don't think I feel like we're fighting for all the nurses and patients and all healthcare workers, and myself personally, I'm fighting to bring them way back where, you know, patients and employees safety come first before profit margins, and it's sad to say.
Myself and the co-chair are committed to just wages now, but certainly work conditions, and we're committed with committee to advance this and hopefully make this law.
Thank you.
I'll take up the mayor, the great Michael Brady.
Thanks very much.
So now the managing director of Pro North America for Investigations. We are a global security company. We work with agencies across the world on security issues. And Mr. Chairman, to your point, is there any voices in here in this chamber who wants less security for the family member when they're at work, or less security for the family member when they're a patient or hospital? I think not. Who would miss the opportunity to have visitors check in with security to say, why are you here? Do you have a reason? Are you sober? Are you in good mental health? And are you going to the right place? Why would we want to miss that opportunity? Why is it an opportunity only from 9 to 6 at night? And there are domestic violence victims at the hospital who have restraining orders against people. Why don't we check them during 9 to 6? Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a statement. First of all, thank you very much for sponsoring this legislation, Mr. Chairman. It's long overdue. I'm just speaking as the son of a registered nurse. My mother was a nurse, and this problem has been going on far too long. One of the stories I remember hearing from her was in the early 1970s when she was working at the old Worcester City Hospital, and she was held at knife point in the emergency room. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you on this and doing what we can to protect our nurses and medical staff.
Thanks very much. Great to see you again, Chief. Mayor Curtis, over Provost, panel.
And we have Chief David Fallon.
Please, come on up.
Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Mr. Mayor. Great to have you.
Good morning, Chairman Timothy, Chairman Naughton, committee members, colleagues, everyone. We are here today to testify in support of the so-called Trust Act. Something I've done before and my city officials as well, because of the extreme importance of disentangling local police law enforcement from the immigration law enforcement forces of the federal government. People in our communities have enough difficulty understanding, even people who've grown up in this country, understanding the difference between local, state, and federal government. People unfamiliar with our system, there is no distinction. And the difficult position that people and officials in local government are placed in when asked to act as an arm of immigration and customs enforcement is untenable, causes tremendous distrust and division in communities, and actually is at cross purposes with law enforcement. There are some great anecdotes, which I'm sure the mayor and Chief Allen will recount. And so I will cede my time to them to tell you the specifics.
Thank you.
Chairman Tilly, Chairman, through the members of the committee, I'm Joe Curtatone, the Mayor of Somerville. Thank you for allowing us to testify today in support of Test 1258. And we're really here to talk about how we promote public safety and build a community. this bill is an important step to build confidence in our local police, as Chief Fallon will emphasize. The confidence, I'm glad to say, is strong in Somerville, much to our community-based and progressive model of policing and our adoption of our local trust act. And I'll point to the events of this last Friday, which are a prime example of why this legislation is so sorely needed and why it will help increase public safety in our communities. As everyone no doubt knows or can recall, last Friday, federal law enforcement officials conducted raids targeting almost 60 MS-13 gang members, an exceptionally renowned and violent international shooting gang across the metro region. Rather than being a repudiation of the principles of the Mass Trust Act, the successful operations of the FBI and local law enforcement against the MS-13 is a reaffirmation of them. The Trust Act, both what some of those adopted and this one, will not and have not prevented these arrests. In fact, it will help and have facilitated such operations against violent criminals by increasing the level of trust and credibility with our local community, in particular, our immigrant community. Somerville's population is a third of it is foreign born. We speak 52 languages from around the world in our neighborhoods and schools, and having their buying to solve issues in public safety and public health is critical to truly build communities. And these communities are terrorized by these thugs. And the trust they have with their local law enforcement officers is critical. And the chief will tell you why that's been successful in Somerville. So I want to emphasize that one because it is at the core of the philosophy behind this bill. When law enforcement has strong relationships with the community, built on trust, it enables our public safety officers to target violent elements, working in cooperation with often marginalized communities who are forced to live in the shadows. But when we bring them out and we engage them and we represent them and serve them, good things happen. We actually start to build a community. And the cooperation of these communities is one of the most powerful tools we can provide to our, as the chief will mention, to our public safety officers. Last Friday, after one suspect escaped federal custody, the Somerville Police Department was able to leverage the relationships they have built to find and detain the individual before he was able to do any harm. That speaks for itself. I would say that absolutely speaks loudly for itself. It is the strongest testimony to offer in support of this crucial bill. When local law enforcement is able to build trust in the community, it enables them to do their jobs in the most effective manner possible. It makes us all safe. We've all heard a lot of rhetoric, nationally and locally, in the last couple of years. That has done nothing to facilitate trust or build safety in our communities. I represent the chief serves an entire community, regardless of their immigration status. And I'll tell you this about the people we're talking about. They're my neighbors, they're my friends. They go to school with our kids. I serve them. And they love my city and your communities in this state and this country just as much as us. I would emphasize bringing them out of the shadows, letting them walk without fear in the streets to pursue a better life in their dream, and not having us having to take the burden of the Fed's job on immigration, which is a field policy to begin with. To build trust, we'll build stronger communities for everyone. And that's why I beg that you support this bill, and I'd like to pass the mic off to Chief Dave Fallon.
Thanks, man. Chief, welcome.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here to speak before you today. Just regarding the Mass Trust Act, I've heard the proposal, and I do not see how it would lessen my officer's ability to serve the community. On the contrary, I believe it will enhance the level of trust between the police and the community, furthering the objective of public safety for all. As police chief, I am responsible for the public safety of all community members, regardless of their immigration status. Residents who are undocumented are often the most vulnerable and subject to victimization. Predators use their immigration status as a weapon against them, whether recruitment into a gang, financial crimes, or victims of domestic violence. As a local police chief, I am concerned about every resident of the city, and any resident living in fear, whether real or perceived, is a concern for the police. Community policing works in Somerville, and community policing is based on communication, which is founded in trust. I appreciate the time to come before you today.
Thanks very much, Paul Bear, and Representative Chief. I mean, you get the hottest city in America, clearly, under your administration, you're doing some fantastic things. And last year, or 2 years ago, your group came in on this bill and did a fantastic job. Just open up to any questions. Absolutely. Representative Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question to Chief Allen. Chief, I hear the word strong relationships built on trust, communication. Do you have any concerns that what apparently would boil down to not cooperating with another federal law enforcement agency may have some negative impacts, or have you spoken with any of your federal partners about this?
Sure, I appreciate the question. And just recently, the mayor authorized us to assign some of these officers to the Department of Homeland Security to build that relationship with the Department of Homeland Security, and especially ICE, which falls underneath them. And it helped us, build connections with them, make sure we're in constant contact with them, and we have that relationship in place.
You may add, Mr. Chairman, for that, thank you for the question. And whether you're a documented, undocumented immigrant who were born in our city, if you want to commit violent acts, we want you out of our city. Quite honestly, because you're preying upon the quality of life of everyone in that community. Our purpose in passing the Local Trust Act and working with groups like Central Representative and Leader and many other advocates is to protect everyone in the city. We are working hand in hand with federal law enforcement. They're doing it the right way. If you recall the Secure Communities Program, which is now defunct because it's found to be unconstitutional, people being pulled over literally for a broken taillight and had a blanketed warrant detainer, under a warrant management system, not based upon probable cause or ruling. That was found to be unconstitutional. So people being feel like, I'm undocumented, I'm in the city, but I want to be part of this community, I want to make the community great, I can be picked up anywhere. Those people weren't talking to police even. And we have cases that you can talk about even when you were the victims or someone that really was a victim of a violent act. Working together and having that communication, understand that we're going to enforce federal law. We're not going to be the Army of Immigration, but in this case, we work with all the agencies to help facilitate the sweep as it pertains to Somerville. We're going to do that. And the community was grateful how it was undertaken, but communication and information only came to us because of the work the Somerville Police Department was able to build trust with those communities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Mayor and Chief, thank you for your testimony. I have two questions, and I'll just ask them both at the same time, and I was hoping you could just comment on. One is, regarding data. Do you have any good data, empirical evidence that shows that what you are doing has not increased crime or not, or maybe decreased crime? Anything at all to that effect, because that would be very useful to ward off critics. And the second point is, do you see any problem with leaving this to individual municipal decisions, so a city-by-city, town-by-town basis, as opposed to a blanket policy for the whole company? So if you just comment on those two things, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, you get to the paper and find it, but this recent sweep by the federal government for the document, 13 members, and we were back and look how some of these bills since 2012, we started talking about, new policy in some of the part and counties with violent gang members. In some of them, I believe, was about 15, and just this last year, it was 3. So if an undocumented student, a resident of Somerville, is attending Somerville High School, what we find is his being undocumented is really putting them under pressure, especially from certain Central American countries, and the students to be forced to join gangs. We need to be able to engage them and say, there's other opportunities here in Somerville. And again, we work with students at the high school, we move gang tattoos, training programs, after-school programs, sports, working with our English second language programs, and it's very important. And our statistics are showing that MS-13 problem, MS-13 issue in Somerville, under some of those guidance, is actually lessening.
And if I could add to that, I would just emphasize that crime is down some 30% in Somerville historic lows. And that can't arrest your way out of the problem. I would say that Somerville Police Department is the most progressive police department in the United States. The chief gets this. This is why he's chief of his community staff. They work continuously in partnership with immigrant providers, social service agencies, the schools, to engage and build that trust. And it's not just that. That is an important part of it. The public has to be part of the problem. As to the impact of trying to do it just provincially to locally, I think that is a good point, Representative Chairman, because if we don't, what is happening now is, let's take this weekend issue, they're paying attention. They know that we're doing our work at the community base at the grassroots levels, making it difficult for them to operate in Somerville, and that's in diminishing. So they're going to communities where
you know, they tend to prey on their own populations, their own ethnic populations, they're going there. And a student who's undocumented, so you can have a whole argument about the immigration, but undocumented, trying to do the right things in this country, get educated, not committing crimes, they don't know where to turn to, because they're afraid if they come forward and say, I'm being recruited into a gang, and there's not community, I might get swept up, my parents and that. So it is exacerbating or perpetuating the problem on the region, where you can't just do this on a community-by-community basis, a wider approach across the Commonwealth will have a greater positive impact.
Just as a follow-up to that, Sue, is it safe to say, or fair to say, that Somerville is not a magnet for like illegal criminal immigrant activity? Is that safe to say?
Somerville is not a magnet for your position for any criminal activity.
Thank you.
I've been sitting here wondering if I was going to wade into this next question, because last time we had looked at this so deeply. In the interim, I spent 6 months deployed, and I was on the Syria issue. And so I was partly in charge of the Joint Operations Center with our allies, and we had a lot of drone feed of the crisis last summer into the fall of the refugees fleeing Syria, surrounding areas in Turkey, Southeastern Europe. And you've never seen, to see 2 million people moved as a wave, as one. And we got this from last week. It up in Greece, into the former Yugoslavia, and then literally, technology is such that, excuse me, as we looked at it, looked at migration, French counterparts, and each of us all said as one. Those aren't all good people. Those aren't all people just fleeing. What can we learn? Because we found that out at the events of New Year's Eve in Cologne, Germany, and other taxes. What can we learn from that? Because that question has to be asked.
Thank you for your
And what that has to be answered.
Thank you. I've also spent 21 years in the United States Air Force. I've been deployed all over the world. I think as a local police chief, what I see is, I think that's a broad national conversation. My job is to provide public safety for every resident of the city of Somerville. And in order to do that, you have to be in communication, you have the trust of every citizen. It's the citizens of Somerville who are turning in the MS-13 members to us, letting us know where they're at, what they're doing, how they're raising money, not violence, not extortion. That trust on the local level is vitally important to weed out the bad people that are there. I think working with our federal partners so closely as we did in this last week shows you that we're capable of doing that.
And if I could just add, to the representative, there's some fundamental questions which we're not going to be able to solve all the problems we brought here. But they're important questions. Thank you for your service, Mr. Chief. These people are in our community. We know that our friends and our neighbors, their kids are there's more than 12 million in this country. We really think 12 million undocumented people are forced to leave this country. That's not going to happen. We're not solving the immigration issue. Technically, at the local level, communities are defeated whether this Commonwealth advances or moves forward and progresses in a socially responsible way. That's where our responsibility lies here. I think there are some important social and moral questions as our role as a country in foreign policy, why waves of refugees and immigrants are coming here, and what role we have in destabilizing those countries. And I have a great deal to say about that too, but I won't say it here. But when people are seeking the one beacon of hope, salvation, and humanity and civilization, do we really want to shut that door? We want to shut that door. I don't think that's what we should be doing. This is about world diplomacy and national policy. We want to ask the question that's fair, but at the local level, we can do something about it. And at the local level, we can actually improve public safety, really at a tangible level, and build a stronger community, region, and Commonwealth with a very simple passing of this bill.
But again, what have they done wrong that we can do right?
On the simulation? Testifying before the wrong panel.
What, immigration-wise, what can we learn from their experiences in the last 6 months to make our cities, our citizens, our immigrants safer? It's probably probably an unfair question to ask in this league, but it's a question that's going to be answered at this level. This isn't a foreign policy discussion, or a diplomatic or defense or homeland security discussion. This is a discussion of strategic cities in the city of this Commonwealth.
I think, being a local police chief, providing public safety is very difficult. I think you really can't look beyond the borders of Somerville, part of the right. You meet, they talk with the major city chiefs, they get their guidance, and really try to act in unison. But coming up to the ranks of the city of Somerville Police Department, I just learned that from a very early level on, that the police cannot solve issues alone in the community. The only way to solve any issue, whether it be immigration, drugs, gangs, violence, domestic violence, is working in conjunction with the community. And the community is every resident of Somerville, irregardless of their immigration status.
I tell you, in terms of that issue, what we can learn, I hope the country, this country is asking that question, what can we learn in terms of our actions and what the consequence of that, the refugee crisis has been. From a security standpoint, I think that's where a lot of that has to be. We know that group of refugees, that particular ethnic group, is the most vetted group of refugees in this nation's history. And there's some reasonable, prudent, and questions being asked about that, and they should be answered. But when they come to our community, I know the lesson we learned is if you don't create a wall between those people and everyone else. Because on that conversation alone, when all the negative rhetoric and shock rhetoric are coming about we shouldn't allow refugees in this state or in this country, the next day, none of the Syrian immigrant kids went to school. And here's the lesson I will tell all you. We sat with them. We held their hands. We bring them into our community. We don't create a wall. We double down on that community, our civility, and our engagement as a community. That's a lesson that we should learn.
And if I may reply to the question you asked directly, I don't think there's any population of people which is 100% good, ever, anywhere. And over time, many immigrant and refugee populations have come to Somerville and fled the war in El Salvador in the 80s. You know how dangerous El Salvador and Nicaragua and Guatemala have become. We have probably, not the hugest number in the state, but at least 100 unaccompanied minors who fled that region in our public schools. And the mayor and the chief, I think, have been modest about how proactive their role has been. The police department holds regular meetings with leaders of the immigrant community, with the pastors of their churches, and this has been going on for years. And this is the way that trust is built. This is why when there is information about someone that's dangerous in the community, folks will dare to come to the police. Folks from countries where people in uniforms are scary people. And you don't want to get yourself and your family in a world of pain by informing on everyone. But this can be achieved, and it is a completely different paradigm from the paradigm of, we represent law enforcement, a monolithic law enforcement, and whatever you may have violated, we will get you for it. So that's an important message to people whose status is not, may not be clear, or may be in the process of being adjudicated, or in mixed status families. It's tremendously important to know that whatever their difficulties are with immigration, it won't get them in trouble with local police. It's kind of similar to some of the distinctions that we're starting to make with the opioid crisis. You can administer Narcan to someone, or you can bring someone who's overdosed to a facility, and there's sort of a good Samaritan drug that might keep you from getting in trouble. And this enables more people to get help. More people get help, the community is better served, the bad guys are identified and apprehended when you have good communications among the good people in the community.
Just Representative Tucker?
To close the last of the loop, I guess, for my comments, I too represent a community that has a strong immigrant population, very vibrant, and I've done quite a bit of outreach, and I've made sure that we built those relationships. Having said that, I will say for the record that I do have great concern, which I expressed to judiciary with the representative who are sponsored the bill over there, and had a very good discussion with him as well. I remain very concerned that we are not cooperating with another law enforcement agency. We've seen too often in Massachusetts where law enforcement agencies that don't cooperate sows the seeds of terrible issues that last a long time. I'm also concerned, I think Sheriff Hodgson raised this point, that we are dispensing with a lawful legal request of federal law. I think that the outreach you're doing is commendable, and I certainly understand the genesis of this bill. I do. Looking at it and the day-to-day when the rubber hits the road, I just think that if we're restoring trust, I think it can be done in that outreach with the clergy, with the community, and that's something that you're already doing. I just have very strong concerns about the relationships between law enforcement agencies.
Thank you very much, Representative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great job, as always.
I'm also here on 2170, the body cams bill, but I can wait if you want to see that.
While you're here.
All right, thank you. I'm here today to speak in support of House 2170, which is a bill that would require police all to wear and use body cameras. The first time I was taken to see the Nutcracker in Boston, there was a big crowd on the sidewalk, and my friends and I went into the crowd, and we saw a man on the sidewalk being kicked by 3 police officers. And I was shocked, and that image stayed with me into my adult life, and I spent the first 8 years of my law career representing municipalities and often having to defend police officers against charges of excessive force and in some cases wrongful death. The kind of evidence that comes from video recording of actual interactions between police and others is exactly the kind of evidence that could settle many of these disputes between the members of the public. I think it is, there is some indication that people behave differently, both police and civilians, when they know that their behavior and speech is being recorded. And that in itself, I think, could ameliorate some interactions that might otherwise be hostile or unproductive. I think that to go back to Rep. Burrow's question, I know that there are grants now in the Commonwealth for police departments to buy body cameras. There have been local decisions to buy body cameras. But I think it's problematic that it's done on a community-by-community basis. Both because I think everyone is entitled to the same standards of justice wherever they go in the Commonwealth. And also because the rules change from community to community, specifically rules that have to do with consent to recording and to the status of recorded interactions as public records, which I think, especially in light of our changes to the public records law, need to be clear and uniform. This bill, I put in what you might call both a belt and suspenders approach, where individuals would be required to give their consent, and these records would not be public records. And I know there are others who see it differently. I think that it's important for someone, if not a judge, at least someone who's very sensitive to the privacy of crime victims, the privacy of sexual assault victims, the privacy of minors, to serve as a screen before any officially recorded videos of interactions with police are just put out there into the world. But I think that if we could assure that these videos were not going to be released without scrutiny, that we might relax the requirement for consent to recording. I think that when a recording starts, and whether a recording happens should be consistent to get the best results. And I think that we could make an exception to our consent to audio recordings law in Massachusetts for body camera, police body camera recordings if we were very secure on the public records end. And I would point out that this kind of evidence would be exactly the sort of thing that would be useful, if not definitive, in cases of review panels of police shootings, such as that proposed in Rep. Gentile's bill, House 3480, which I also support. And I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. Representative Brew?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. I love the idea of this bill. I really do. It's decrease a lot of scrutiny that police get. It's well more than 99% of the time, well over that they're doing the right things. Those high-profile examples of trauma, if you will, putting it mildly, that get all the attention. I contacted my police chief about this morning, and I got an email back from him, and I said, "What's your opinion about this?" He said, it's very short, so I'll read it. It's a double-edged sword. I support the use of them being body cameras, but public records requests and citizen privacy issues still need to be considered. I don't have the needed staff to handle the amount of requests we will get. That was one comment. And the other one is, and I hope you can comment on both of these, maybe the folks with age can also comment on this. To get around union bargaining issues, the law should read, notwithstanding Chapter 150E of the Mass General Laws, it would remove any bargaining requirements, otherwise unions will fight this endeavor and demand stipends, etc. Storage capacity is another issue. So could you comment on that? And we've got two folks from age here as well, maybe later on, or even now with the Chairman of the Commission, they could comment on that as well. So that'll be it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, multiple questions here. This is the first session in which I filed this bill, and it was a lot of drafting, but I don't pretend that it's the ultimate bill. It's just my best first shot as somebody who did practice municipal law for a long time, which included dealing with lots of public records requests and lots of litigation in which people sought sensitive records. For instance, police personnel records in the course of litigation, or even student records. I'm very attuned to both how labor intensive it is to respond to public records requests, how much awareness it takes of both state law and federal laws like HIPAA and the family information, I can't think of the acronym, that covers so many school records. There we go. But there's there are many considerations, and I think that should not have to be a burden on local governments, some of which don't have a lot of deep capacity to do that task. That's why I feel very strongly that these should not be public records, and that any release should be subject to, if not a court order, to